Good morning and welcome back to class. So today is our first workshop day, of course. Now, you may notice I'm recording outside. It's because it's the middle of the day here, and it's Sunday, which, of course, in the States is a weekend. So my kids are all running around. So rather than, having their shouting and running in the background, I figured it would be better to go outside. There may be a little noise in the background, so I hope you can hear me okay. And, it's the sun, so it's a little bright, so I apologize for the glare. So, what I need to do with you guys is to give you some introduction to the basics of peer review workshopping. And we're going to go over that before you start work on your own workshop. This will be the first of several workshops in this class. We'll be workshopping the first and third draft of each of the papers. But this is our first time around, so it's going to be new for some of you. Again, I don't really know if you've done this in your previous classes at AOW or not. So maybe this will be something totally new for you. Maybe it'll be something not so new. But, at the bare minimum, I want to give you an idea of what my expectations are, how I want to run the workshop, and so on, even if it's not something that's completely new to you. So I want to start out by talking a little bit about what not to do in the peer review workshop. What not to do is really every bit as important as what to do. Now, if I were there in person at this point, I would have a couple of things to show you and pass around the room. But obviously, I'm not there, and I can't even show you on the camera because these two things they're back in Dhaka, so they're much closer to you than they are to me. But these are two short stories from writing workshops that I've taken myself in the past. Now, and they're both. Drafts that I had turned in. I made copies for the class, and got them back, and I've kept both of them for many years, and I find they're quite useful in terms of what not to do. So the first one was in the first writing workshop I ever took as an undergraduate. It was a fiction workshop, and in the class we wrote short stories. And we brought them in. We made copies for all the class. We didn't do workshop groups here. If you think it's scary to share your draft with one or two people, imagine sharing it with all 15 people in the class. So we brought it in, and a big chunk of the class was devoted to the class discussing the story, giving feedback, and so on. And the rule in this particular class, just to make it more terrifying, was that the class was supposed to pretend and act as if you weren't even there. You weren't allowed to speak. They just sort of ignored you. They talked about it. And then at the end, we were, whoever's story had been workshopped got a brief chance to respond, and then they got back all the drafts with feedback written on them. Because in addition to talking about it in class, an important part of workshopping is writing down feedback as well. Now, in this class, we were told, do not sign your names to your feedback. It should be anonymous. That way you get to be more honest. Now, I think this is a bad idea. We won't do it this way, and here's really the reason why. Well, after this workshop, which I was very excited about, nervous, but also excited. After the workshop, I was out in the courtyard outside of the building where my classroom was. And I was going through looking at all these different drafts. Again, there were like 15 people in the class, so I had 15 copies of my story back. And I looked through them, and, most of them were pretty good. They had some criticisms and some encouragement. They had smart things to say. And then I got to one. And at the top of the first page of the story, next to the title, this person had written, "Is this the best you can do?" Well, you can imagine my feeling at that. As I went through it, I found more and more comments that really just got worse and worse. He wrote lame, crap plus lame, on and on and on and on. Now, finally, at the end of the story, he wrote something. It was like, you tend to hammer home this story as a lesson in morality. Try to be more subtle, This is not kindergarten, and I'm not blind to moral implications. So, as you can imagine, think of yourself if you got this feedback back from your first workshop. I was upset. I was devastated. And like I said, we weren't supposed to sign our name, so I didn't know who it was. But I was a little bit obsessed with who could this be. You can imagine. You'd want to know. And I finally worked it out. And then when I figured out who it was, I sort of went, my jaw dropped a little because I realized why. Now, the way I figured it out was this person, his name was Errol. We had workshopped Errol's short story maybe a week or two earlier. And it didn't go well for him. He got really a lot of negative criticism, not a lot of praise. And when I did my written feedback to his story, now for some reason when he printed out his story and made copies, he had like big gigantic font. Like instead of 12-point font, it was like 18-point font. It was way too big. And I wrote on his draft without really thinking about it too much. I wrote, why did you use such a big font? This isn't kindergarten and I'm not blind. Now, those words may sound familiar to you. He threw them back at me. So somehow he figured out I was the one who wrote this on his paper, and he was clearly very angry, very upset, and he lashed out. So one lesson from this story is don't be like that guy. Don't be like Errol. Don't be a jerk, okay? Don't try to hurt other people's feelings. That's not okay. That's not acceptable. But that's not the only lesson here. The other lesson is don't be like me, okay? I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I wasn't trying to be mean. I wasn't trying to hurt his feelings. I also just wasn't thinking, I wasn't being sensitive. I didn't stop and think what it would, how it would feel for him to receive this feedback on his draft. And my point was valid. He shouldn't have had such gigantic font. But the way I expressed it was rude and hurtful. So keep this in mind, and don't be like him, but don't be like me either. Before you say or write anything in response to your peers' work, I want you to take just a moment to ask yourself the question, how would I feel if I got this feedback? It doesn't mean you can't be critical. In fact, you should be critical. You should point out negative things. But you need to do it in a way that's sensitive and that is constructive. And we'll talk again about this idea of constructive criticism in a moment. So the second story is from when I was in my first graduate program. My first graduate program was a master's degree in creative writing at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And again, in the very first, it was the second writing workshop I took there. It was a novel writing workshop. There was a guy in the class named Ivan. And when I got his back, again, I wish I could show it to you because the visual is what really makes it. But if you look at the story and you go through page after page, you can find out he's crossed out almost everything in the entire story and written something new. So again, this is what you don't want to do. It is not your job to rewrite your workshop partner's story. Okay? It is your job to give them some suggestions and give them feedback. It is not your job to fix everything. It is not your job to write their paper for them. Okay, so don't be me, don't be Errol, don't be Ivan. So these are the basics of what not to do. Just as important, though, is what you should do. So here's how we'll handle this workshop. And there are different ways to do workshops, so we'll see how this works. If it doesn't work so well, we'll try something else. If it does work well, great. So first thing you need to do is to break into assigned groups. In one of the classes, it'll be groups of 2, and the other one will be groups of 3. So once you've sort of met up with your group, you should exchange drafts. So give them the copies of the drafts. And then the first thing we will do in the group is you will read through each other's papers with a pen in hand. And as you read it, so I said pen in hand and I didn't have a pen in hand. Here it is. So as you read it, you'll write comments. Now there are 2 types of comments you can write. First is what are called marginal comments. So these go on each page in the margin of the page. So if there's one moment in your partner's CROTS paper which is just totally amazing, blows your mind, makes you so excited, you can write in the margin, wow, this is incredible, I want to hear more about this. Or if there's a part that makes you laugh, you can say, oh, this is so funny, right there next to it. If there's a part that you're confused by, you can say, wait, what is going on here? I don't understand. So marginal comments are good places to respond to specific moments in the paper. Second type comes at the end. It's what's called an end comment. So end comments, these are better places to address the whole paper. What do you feel about it as a whole, not just the specific points? So you should include both of these types of comments. And, be generous with your feedback. Don't just write down a couple words and then move on. You want to try to give real, meaningful, significant feedback, to do as much as you can. So after you're done with this, you can return each other's papers, and then for the remainder of the time, you can discuss it with each other. You can talk about each other's papers, about how they compare, what they have in similar, how they're different, where you can go from here. Now, if you run out of time, if you have too much time, if you finish all the work in the group and there's still time left in class, what you can do is you can find another group who's also finished, and you can exchange with them and start the process over again. If this happens, it's great. It means you get to have more feedback. But if you finish early, don't just say, "Oh, can I leave?" Because this is valuable class time. Now, when you're giving your feedback, a couple things to keep in mind. One, it's very important to give both criticism, so the negatives, and also to praise, to point out the positives. Both of these are equally important. If it's all positive, then they're never going to improve on the parts that are bad. But if it's all negative, people will be discouraged, and also, mosquito, and also they will, they won't, well, if you don't point out to them what's good, how can they do more that's good, right? Because maybe they don't know themselves. Another thing to keep in mind is this idea I mentioned before of constructive criticism. Okay, this is bad. That's criticism. It's not constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is criticism that doesn't just tear down, but it helps the person to build up. So, for example, instead of saying, this is bad, say, here's how you can make this better. Okay, that's the difference between just mean criticism and constructive criticism. So, there are, anytime there's a workshop, I always like to give my students 5 main points to focus their feedback on. Now, these, you shouldn't be limited to just responding to these specific questions. These are ideas for how to start. Other things that come up, great. Go for them. Don't just be limited by this. So I always come up with 5. So here are the 5 for today. Number 1, if this draft were too long and your workshop partner had to cut something, what would you suggest they cut? So this helps you get at some of the more negative parts without being a jerk about it. Number 2, what part of the essay grabs your interest the most and why? So this allows you, on the other hand, to get at the positives. Number 3, in your workshop partner's CROTs, do they use different types of writing? Be they, fiction, poetry, diary entry, song lyrics, whatever the case may be. Have they done this? If not, give them a suggestion for how they could incorporate this, how they could do this in their paper. So number 4, what is the central theme that unifies all the CROTs, that holds them together? If you can't identify what the theme is, that's a good sign that the paper needs some more focus, and that's something to work on in revision. And finally, number 5, do you feel like you understand your workshop partner better after you have read their paper? And if so, how do you understand them better? If not, then, what could they do to help you understand better? Okay, so those are the 5 main points. Now, I always tell this to my classes when they're going on their first workshop. The workshop day, the sun was was somewhere else. Now it's back here. Trying to adjust my screen, but it doesn't help. The workshop day can be the most valuable day of class, or it can be the biggest waste of time you've ever had. And which of those it is really up to you guys. You know, I can lay the groundwork to try to help you out, to try to give you good guidelines, but it's really up to all of you to decide, am I going to take advantage of this time, use it to good effect, use it to be able to improve my paper in revision, or am I going to goof off? Okay, I can't force you to make that decision, but I hope you make the right one. So last thing to mention is what's coming up. Now, obviously, if you go back and look at the syllabus, we're way behind. We haven't really gotten into the, we've been focusing on this paper. We haven't really gotten into so much the subject matter of the class. So we're gonna have to do some things to catch up. So we're gonna have to move, and we're also gonna have to move a little quickly these next few weeks. So 2 things coming up. First of all, for Wednesday, we're going to have a reading, Shitty First Drafts by Anne Lamott. I think I mentioned that before in a video, but I didn't end up uploading it because I decided to push it back. But we are going to do that now. So you should read that for Wednesday. It's just a few pages long, so it's not going to be too much of a problem to read it for Wednesday. I've already uploaded it to the Facebook group, so you can find it there. And then next Wednesday, so 1 week and 2 days from today, your second draft will be due. So you're going to be getting the feedback from the workshop today, and then you have 1 week and 2 days to produce a second draft. Second draft will not be workshopped, but unlike first draft, you will be submitting it to me. And I will, pretty quickly be responding to all of you with feedback on that draft. So that is about it. I will talk to all of you via Skype on Wednesday. Best of luck with your workshop.